I'm the Director of Solutions Architecture at Ubersmith. How many of you have heard of Ubersmith before? A few, okay. So our product is an all-in-one solution for managing clients, provisioning services, support, ticketing, and managing devices. And I know this is a lofty title, but what I want to talk about is when we're really talking about business management software, we're talking about how your team runs your business, right? So let's talk a little bit about teams. Let's talk about modern team building. What are the challenges, right? In 2016, modern team building really means that everybody has different schedules, right? People live in different geographical regions, and also everybody's using different platforms. So, the last one is probably the most important of these, right? We typically think of this as, Mac versus PC versus Linux. But also, when teams are distributed, like they are in the modern era, items like time zones or different regions and stuff like that really affect the way that you do business. So let's dig a little deeper into this. How many of you are familiar with Atlassian? They're makers of Jira, which is used for project management, and also Confluence for knowledge base. So they're very familiar with the current landscape. And they recently did a survey of 1,300 plus customers of theirs, and they found that 72% of respondents have remote employees, regardless of industry. And that's something that I want to reiterate, because that's really important. We may have pioneered in the software industry this idea of a distributed team, but more and more this is happening across the landscape. Anybody that's using software, whether they're in the software industry or not, kind of sees this as an increasing trend. The other stat that I think is really interesting from this survey is that 85% of respondents utilize a distributed version control system. How many people know what that means? Few. Okay. So what we're really talking about here is stuff like, now the most popular one is Git. The one that it kind of eclipsed recently is SVN, and you don't have to date yourself by raising your hand, but some of us probably remember CVS. So let's talk a little bit about that and what that means. So this is data sourced from Google Trends that shows the interest in Git versus SVN over time in terms of searches on Google, right? The interesting thing about Git is that it's completely decentralized. So Git marks kind of a big departure in how we approach version control. And this is kind of indicative of all of these trends. So if you set your Wayback Machine all the way to about 10 years ago, 2005, you can see that they're both increasing in popularity, and they, both are roughly the same, right? The crucial inflection point here is around 2010. And that's really when Git started to run away from SVN. And as you see, SVN is decreasing in popularity, less and less people are using it, and SVN is continuing to become more popular. I don't think this trend is going to stop anytime soon. And you can check recent reports from people like Structure Research or 451, and they will corroborate this. So what does this really mean in terms of distributed workflows? I mean, we're really talking about is distributed teams as well. So let's talk about the advantages of a distributed team. So number one is flexibility, right? A distributed team can be more agile, and I mean agile in the lowercase a sense. The other thing is that you can hire the best talent if you have that flexibility, right? So for example, when we were hiring for our own CTO as a replacement, we hired in Montreal. We're actually based in New York City, and I'm sure we could find a great candidate in New York City, but we felt that the best candidate was somewhere else. And this is something that we probably couldn't have done 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. But now, because of the way that people work, we're able to find the best talent, right? So that's a big advantage. The other thing is culture, right? So if you have a distributed team working in different geographical regions, then they have made inroads probably in the local markets that you can't possibly make, no matter how many translation tools you use and no matter how many languages people on your local team speak, somebody who lives abroad is able to have better relationships with your customers and prospects, right? The other thing, of course, is availability. If you're a data center or you provide support services, obviously having a distributed team is really something that you must do. It's not an option. So to have 24-hour support, you might have somebody in Asia Pac or a different region that's running support while your team is sleeping here, whether it's in Phoenix or New York or somewhere in America. And that's something that I think is crucial to modern business, right? Let's talk about the big picture. I'm sure most, if not all of you, are familiar with Mark Andreessen. He's kind of a founding father of the internet as we know it. He's instrumental in starting Mosaic and Netscape. And this is kind of a famous quote. He basically says, software is eating the world. And what does that really mean in the modern era? The rise of open source and modular systems means we have more moving parts, right? So what is all of this saying? The rise of Git and decentralized teams means that more and more we're building things with different components. Everything is becoming more modular, right? And so we have a lot more moving parts, and we need to vet them for all kinds of caveats that you may run into, right? I know this talk is called Finding the Holy Grail of Business Management Software, but really 9 times out of 10, you don't find it, you end up building it. So let's talk about business management in general, right? Imagine that this person in the center of the diagram is an employee at your company, right? Your company is small in the beginning, but her job seems relatively simple. And I've broken down business management into these 4 parts, just for simplicity, right? So orders come in. When an order comes in, she's got to turn around and check the infrastructure and see how you guys can support the order. So once the order is provisioned into a service, of course your company has to bill for it, right? So you bill for it, you invoice it, and no matter how perfect you think your product is, every product needs support. So at some point, a client is going to call you. So you need support help desk software in order to achieve that goal as well, right? How many of you have heard the term swivel chair process? No? Okay, a few. The swivel chair process basically means exactly what it sounds like. If you imagine her at the center of this, literally sitting in an office chair, she's spinning around, going from system to system, copying, pasting data. Maybe some of it is printed out and re-entered into a different system. And you can imagine when you have 10 clients, it's not so bad. When you have 100 clients, it becomes a little bit more painful. As your business grows, if your business is successful and it grows as you want it to, you can imagine she's going to be spinning around in this chair like crazy. And that becomes a big problem later on. So you have to really vet software in advance to see how you can prevent these problems from the get-go. A tightly integrated system looks more like this. These are the same 4 components, but you see them tessellated like puzzle pieces. And when it's like this, whether you find something that does 90% of what you needed to do already and just need to augment it a little bit, or you build it from many discrete systems, this is ideally what you want it to look like. How do we get here? This is all nice and, it's a cute graphic or whatever, but how do we actually get here? What are the most important factors that you need to consider up front when you're building a new business? Okay, so the first one I'd say is stability, right? Is the software that you're vetting up front robust? What do you know about its track record in terms of how often does it crash? How often do you need to seek support for it? And how well is it supported? Is the support team good? Do they have a solution architect that can help you implement the software up front? Do they have good support people who aren't just going to give you canned answers when you need a real solution, right? Also, is it scalable? Like I said before, going from 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 clients is a really difficult task. So one of the things we do at Ubersmith, by the way, we drink our own Kool-Aid, so we run our business on Ubersmith. And one of the things that we've found is that we like to test with very big data sets, talking about 10 or 100 times larger than we think that we would see in our own system. And the beautiful thing about that is being able to be prepared for something way in advance. And this is something that gets skipped too often. I've heard many clients come to me and say later on, oh, we're on this system, but 10 years later, we found out that we can no longer use it. And now they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and they have to scramble to find something else. And the migration is done sloppily. So that's really important. The second thing is security, right? what's the track record? With a simple Google search, you can find out the vulnerabilities and when there have been leaks or any kind of compromises. So that's one thing that you got to look for. The other thing is PA-DSS compliance, right? So I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but basically when you store credit cards, the encryption has to be strong, and you have to make sure that just in case anything ever gets leaked, it's not able to be penetrated, right? Related to that as well as password storage. And you have to really stay up to date with encryption schemes, right? As we all know, at one point we thought MD5 hashes were fine, and then SHA, and now people are talking about bcrypt and other things, right? So you have to stay on top of this and vet systems up front for this kind of security. The final thing that I think is really important is interoperability, right? I'm crazy about APIs. So the first thing that I look for when I'm vetting a piece of software is how extensible is it? What does the API look like? What's the documentation on the API look like? The other thing, going back again to talking about platforms, is that piece of software cross-platform, or at the very least, does it have a web interface so that everybody can use it? And then the final thing is mobile access. Ideally, you would have an app, but if you have a responsive web design that's able to be viewed on mobile, that's good enough in my opinion. So if you vet software up front for these three pillars, I believe that you will reach this ideal. And so, whether you build it or you find the Holy Grail, I think this is exactly how you get there. Thank you. Do you guys have any questions? If you do, you can catch me after the talk. I know we're running a bit behind. Thank you.